as you just heard. So the bonus to this is that you'll be able to revisit everything that's going over during the course of the webinar that will be on the Illinois Food Scrap and Composting Coalition, the IFSCC YouTube channel afterwards. And additionally, just want to let you guys all know that we will have an email come out to everybody who's attending that will include the slides and everything and some additional resources. So, know that will be coming down the pipeline. And then feel free to type any questions you have in the chat, and we'll be monitoring and responding throughout the event. So anything that you have, go ahead and pop it in there. So next slide, Amy. All right, perfect. So introductions. I am Gretchen Manson. I will start with that. I work for TLC, the Land Conservancy of McHenry County. And I'll talk a little bit more about them, or the organization in just a second. But I wanted to first introduce our presenters for tonight, who are going to be sharing their extensive compost knowledge with us all. And first up is going to be Gwen. She is a current biology student at Carleton College and a member of the IFSCC's Young Professionals Board. She began working in composting in 2018 as a container washer for the Collective Resource and is now studying compost emissions for her senior thesis project. She's going to hand it over to Jess Polanski from Midwest Organics, and she is both in business development and marketing there. Midwest Organics is a large-scale windrow composting operation in McHenry, creating OMRI certified organimix compost. She joined the team there in April of 2024 to help strengthen the business and expand channels to distribute more compost in our area. She handles marketing, sales, web management, planning, and more. And her goal is for Midwest Organics to help them become a leader in the compost industry, as well as the overall environmental movement here in Illinois. And then we're going to finish up with Benjamin from IFSCC. He serves as the executive director. He has previously served in the organization also as the chairman, vice chair, board member, and chair of the Compost Market Development Committee. IFSCC is the Illinois chapter of the U.S. Composting Council, which Benjamin has been a member of since 2016, as well as having been a member of the chapter advisory committee since January of 2024. So this is the all-star team that is going to tell us all about compost, everything we need to know, and everything and more. Okay, we can go to the next slide. All right, so as I mentioned, I'm from the Land Conservancy of McHenry County. If you are not familiar with us, we are a private member-based nonprofit and work primarily with private landowners to preserve natural, scenic, and agricultural land within McHenry County. There's some statistics there. We've preserved over 3,300 acres in McHenry County, 1,000 of which is open to the public that we own. We have some sort of flagship programs that we offer that you might be familiar with. Conservation at Home, which helps homeowners build thriving ecosystems in their own yard. We have Women's Learning Circles, which are workshops for farm managers and owners to share resources and build community. And one of the newest projects that is the one that I head up is our Apple Creek Food Forest, which is a conversion of a conventional farming parcel to a demonstration space that includes edible perennials, trees, shrubs, and that's something that is just kicking off. Couple of things that I wanted to talk about just from a standpoint we have coming up is the spring sustainability sale, which includes both online and in-person sales. We've got native forbs, grasses, trees, shrubs, rain barrels, and bing bing composters. So spoiler alert, Gwen's going to be talking through the different models of composters later in the presentation, but and two of them we will have as part of our sale. But I just wanted to put that little plug out there in advance. And then not knowing entirely who our audience is, if you want to come to our annual celebration, we have an agricultural focus this year. Mark Shepard, who is the author of Restoration Agriculture, is going to be speaking about agroforestry and sustainable and conservation agricultural practices. So details for all of these programs, events, and much more can be found on our website, which is the QR is there. Otherwise, it's at conservancy.org. Next slide. And then as part of Soil Health Week, soil enthusiasts like yourselves have the opportunity to attend over 25 in-person and virtual farm tours, educational events across Illinois, deep dive into climate discussions, and hear from experts on why soil should be protected and celebrated. So be sure to scope out the rest of the events, as there are so many different opportunities to learn more. And now I'm going to hand things over to Gwen.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gretchen.
Mm-hmm.
So next slide. In this section, I'll be talking about what is composting, starting with a broad overview. And so the term composting, at least how we'll be describing it in this presentation, it refers to the aerobic, so oxygen required, process that converts food scraps and other organic waste into compost, which is a nutritious soil amendment. And this process is very similar to the microbial decomposition that occurs, say, in a forest when leaves fall on the ground and decompose. But in this case, it's happening in a controlled manner. So we can think of it as happening in a backyard bin or a commercial composting windrow. And this food process that's happening here, we can think of compost as kind of filling the gap and closing this nutrient circle. So plants get nutrients from the soil. We eat those plants and we produce a little bit of waste. And the nutrients in that waste can be recycled back into the soil through composting. Okay, next slide. Composting would not be possible without a complex food web of microorganisms. So at the base of this food web, really doing most of the work is the bacteria and the fungi, which are consuming the organic material, such as the food scraps that you put in your bin. Then there's larger organisms like mites, beetles, and worms. They consume these microorganisms, and they also play a role in breaking down some of the larger organics. Okay, next slide. Composting can be done with a wide variety of ingredients, but regardless of what exactly your ingredients are, the materials should have a good carbon to nitrogen ratio. So ideally 1 part nitrogen rich to 3 parts carbon rich. And this ratio is important because microbes, they need carbon for energy and nitrogen for making proteins. So we can think of nitrogen-rich things as things that are green and moist. So this is most of the stuff coming from your kitchen, your apple cores, carrot peels, leafy greens. I will point out it doesn't have to necessarily be green, but they often are. And then your carbon-rich things are things that are dry and brown. So here we're thinking like dry leaves, your broken up egg cartons, maybe some pine cones and dried twigs. Then another benefit of your carbon-rich is that they help to keep the pile nice and fluffy, nice and aerated. Okay, next slide. In terms of what can be composted, a good rule of thumb is if it grows, it goes. So anything that came from a growing plant or a growing animal can be composted. This includes anything from banana peels to bread, coffee grounds, even meat, and then the products of that, so like dairy and eggs. Paper products are also compostable, but in most cases, you're going to want to prioritize recycling those unless they're contaminated with food. Next slide. And because these microbes are alive, they also need a few more things to stay healthy in these pile. So air and water are especially important. Just as we require air and water for our cellular metabolism, so too do microbes. So in these photos, you can see mechanical aeration at a commercial composting site and then watering a backyard bin. Next slide. Okay, so once you have your good mix of carbon to nitrogen, the incorporation of sufficient oxygen and air and water, the microbes will quickly start to decompose the material in the compost pile. And all of this metabolism releases a lot of heat as a byproduct, just like we produce body heat in response to our metabolism. And this causes the pile to warm up. So the hottest stage is the thermophilic stage. In a backyard bin, it can get up to 120 degrees. In a composting windrow, these are much larger, more insulated, so they can get a lot hotter, about up to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Eventually, the easily degradable organic material will be broken down and the pile will start to cool down into the stabilization or maturation phase. But the benefit of having that really hot stage is that we have a deactivation of pathogens and weed seeds. And this makes compost suitable for direct application into crop fields or even in your backyard garden. Next slide. Okay, this section we've covered how to compost. Now, why do we compost? Next slide. Okay, composting is a great way to sustainably handle wasted food. However, we first want to prioritize not wasting food in the first place. This is the EPA's wasted food scale. So here in dark green, you can see that the most preferred option is to just prevent wasted food. And then in the red is the least preferred option. This is landfills and incineration. So whenever we have surplus food, we first want to ask, can this be donated? Can it be upcycled? Can it be used to feed animals? And if the answer is no to all that, then composting or anaerobic digestion is a great way to go. Next slide. Okay, so why is composting better than landfilling? There are many reasons, but a large one is because landfills emit methane. So when you bury food waste in a landfill, it gets trapped away from oxygen and it begins to decompose anaerobically. This produces a mix of both carbon dioxide and methane. However, in a compost bin, we actively incorporate oxygen, and this prevents the emission of methane. The aerobic decomposition process primarily emits carbon dioxide. Next slide. Okay, both of these gases, carbon dioxide and methane, they're greenhouse gases, which means that when they're released into our atmosphere, they contribute to the warming of our planet. However, methane is far more potent. So on a 20-year time scale, methane is 85 times more potent than carbon dioxide, meaning if today you released 1 molecule of methane into the atmosphere, in 20 years, it will have caused a warming effect equivalent to releasing over 85 molecules of carbon dioxide. Next slide. Okay, when we look at where these methane emissions are coming from, a significant portion is landfills. So in the US, the third largest methane source is landfills, and that is 14% of our methane emissions. Next. And it's largely the food waste in landfills that are responsible for this methane emission. So 58%, over half, of all the heat trapping methane that's coming from landfills, it could be prevented if we just stopped adding food waste into landfills. Next slide. Okay, landfills not only produce climate warming gases like methane, they also take up a lot of space. So when you bury material in a landfill, be it organic or inorganic material, it accumulates. And eventually the landfill will reach capacity and we'll need to convert more land to storing our trash and more landfill leachate will be produced. However, because composting is a cyclical system, the final product can be reincorporated into the soil and we can continuously theoretically use that same plot of land in perpetuity for composting. Next slide. Okay. Another benefit of compost is that when we apply it to an agricultural field, it helps to sequester carbon. And it does so in 2 primary ways. Compost is just in nature rich in carbon. And so when we mix it with agricultural soils, it helps to increase their innate carbon content. But since compost is also pretty rich in nutrients, it can enhance plant growth. This causes, it can cause an increase in photosynthesis, which pulls more carbon dioxide out of our atmosphere and helps deposit some of that into the soil. Next slide. Some more additional soil benefits of adding compost. We get increased water retention. This can reduce the need to water, increase permeability, which can reduce flood risk, which is especially important when we're thinking about climate change. We get stronger soil structure, helping to prevent erosion, and a higher nutrient content. These are special in that they're especially slow releasing nutrients, and it limits the need for synthetic fertilizer. Next slide. Okay, there's many ways of composting. In this section, I'll be focusing on backyard composting. Okay, so backyard composting is great for those who have a little bit of backyard space, who want to get to know the process of composting and use the final product in their yards. So generically, what you'll need is a little bit of backyard space, ideally at least 1 meter square in size, partly shady. You'll need a compost bin. We'll talk more about that in the next slide. A kitchen collection bucket is nice so that you can periodically take your food scraps from the kitchen into the backyard. You'll want a pitchfork or a shovel, something that you can dig a hole and add your food scraps and as well to aerate it. And a water source, especially if your bin is covered and it doesn't get rainfall. And then a composting thermometer is just an extra thing. If you want to keep track of what stage your compost is in, how well it's matured, that can be really helpful. Next slide. Okay, there are many different types of backyard bins. They can be handmade, they can be purchased. So as mentioned before, the Land Conservancy is having an online sale in April for composting containers, and these are going to include tumblers like the one in the bottom middle, and then closed static vessels similar to the one in the top left. So one other thing though, if you choose to build your own bin, say with chicken wire or wood slats, it's important to keep in mind that some local ordinances have different requirements for bins. And this is primarily to keep out rodents. So closed bins with openings no larger than a half an inch are typically good to keep out all rodents. But for more information, you can always go to the IFSCC website. Next slide. Something different about backyard composting is that it doesn't get as hot as commercial composting. This means it can take a limited amount of organics. So typically we think of fruit and vegetable scraps plus coffee grounds and eggshells, things that are coming from your kitchen. Next slide. And this is primarily to avoid your pile getting stinky and attracting pets. So the do not list for backyard composting is anything that contains a lot of grease, so anything like plate waste, grains, dairy, or meat. And you also don't want to add any compostable plastics. These will not fully break down in your pile. Next slide. Another thing to keep in mind with a backyard bin is that your browns, which are your carbon-rich material, they're most often available in the fall. So while you'll want to keep fallen leaves on your garden to provide pollinator habitat, any dry leaves that falls on pavement, as well as pine cones or twig material, these can be collected so that you can use them year-round. Next slide. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, you'll want to incorporate air and water into your compost pile. This will keep the aerobic microorganisms alive and healthy. And then for a bit of reference, your compost pile should be about as fluffy as a tossed salad and as moist as a wrung out sponge. Okay, last slide. Once your compost is finished, and this can take about 6 months, you'll know it's ready when it has a uniform dark brown color, a crumbly texture, and a pleasant earthy smell. So it can be added to soil where it contributes to soil health by adding those slow-releasing nutrients. It can also increase the structure and water retention. So it's a great addition to your garden. Now I'm going to pass it over to Jess from Midwest Organics, who will cover more of the commercial composting slide.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming and being with us tonight. I'm going to talk about, like Gwen said, commercial composting. So next slide. Okay. So, sorry, something is going on with my computer here. Not able to see, my apologies. Okay. Midwest Organics Recycling, we are a large-scale windrow composter, and we're located in McHenry. Windrow composting involves arranging materials in the long windrows. They're about 8 to 10 feet tall, up to 8 feet wide, and as long as a football field, at least on our site. The windrows are turned using a large machine called a turner. If you see that in the top photo there, that's actually an aerial shot from our site of our turner working on one of our piles. And the steam that you see coming out is not from the machine. It's actually from the inside of the compost pile. The turner moves the inside of the pile to the outside, so it creates a faster decomposition process through more aggressive aeration. Being a commercial composter, we collect tipping fees for each load that gets dropped to us. Most of which are going to come from large scale landscapers or companies like LRS and Groot. So when you put your yard waste out for LRS or Groot to pick up, a lot of the times it's coming to us to be composted. Next slide. So a lot of people are wondering, how do you find good finished compost? How do you know what is the good stuff to buy? The first and most important thing is going to be test results. Test results are your best friend. Always ask your compost producer for their test results. For example, Midwest Organics, we have an STA certified compost certification and OMRI certification. OMRI means that we are able to be used in organic food production. You can go as far as to getting your own soil tested at home to kind of see where you're lacking or too much in nutrients, so that you can choose a compost that is going to be a best match for you. As far as grade size, which is the size of the grain of the compost when it's finished. Finer grades are better for gardening and more detailed projects, and coarser grades are better for landscaping, mulch, lawns, and trees. Next slide. So continuing on how to buy good finished compost, you're going to want to look for what is the feedstock. So feedstock is the term used by composters to describe the recipe or the ingredients that make up the compost. Certain feedstocks supply certain nutrients, and diverse feedstocks make more diverse compost. So for example, Midwest Organics, we have 70% landscape waste, 10% food scraps, 10% horse bedding, and 10% cow manure. So our blend is very balanced because we take a lot of different types of decomposable nutrients. Next slide. Compost can be used in many different ways, including vegetable gardens, flower beds, around the base of trees and shrubs, as a lawn dressing on top of your lawn to help suppress weeds and help your grass grow better, in houseplants, and plenty more applications. Anywhere that you need nutrition for your plant life, you can probably use compost. You can feel free to reference this particular slide in the follow-up email that's going to be sent to you, where you're going to get access to these slides for a little bit more detailed ratios and how to use compost in a more simple way. Next slide. So there's a lot of uses for finished compost that go beyond what we as home compost users know it to be. So obviously you can spray it on farm fields, and you can also use it in a lot of construction and erosion control projects. So what you see in the top left is what's known as a compost sock, and it's a large scale use of compost that helps with erosion. So if you ever see like sand socks on the side of the road, or a lot of times they could be compost socks. It can be used even in construction fill, in the base of construction sites to add more bulk to the foundation. And, you know, as we all know, it has lots of different properties. It helps control weeds. It helps add nutrients and fertilization properties to your soil. It helps with water retention. So really overall, compost, it's a great product. And whether you make your own or decide to purchase it from a producer, you can't go wrong. And I'll pass it over to Benjamin.
Thank you. So I'm going to try and hit a few topics here and start off with compost quality and quality compost. Jess has mentioned some bits of vocabulary. It's shared some information. I'm going to take you through some thoughts that'll help you find it more comfortably, potentially at the commercial scale. So next slide, please. So compost, it's not just leaf mulch, it's not just bark mulch. There's an actual definition, and as Gwen explained to us, there is a whole biological process, and if it's completed and it's completed properly, you end up with compost. If you don't, then you have a risky product that is not, potentially risky product that is not compost. It can be a mulch potentially, but it certainly might not fit the profile of actual compost. There's a definition. This is the AAPFCO definition in 2018 that was created and approved in association with the U.S. Composting Council. So I'm not going to go through this at length, but the point here is just to say, there's an actual definition for compost, and it is to be respected. So next slide, please. We just mentioned the Seal of Testing Assurance. This is a U.S. Composting Council program, and quite frankly, it's the only program that really does report and test and report compost. OMRI is a different set of standards. It's a valuable certification. The STA program is what I'm going to talk about here. It's a IFSCC product, and it's a reporting program. Except for two parameters, it's not pass-fail. It's going to give you information about the compost, which in conjunction with your use, your particular use and needs of that use, as well as your particular soils. It'll help you to find the right product if you have choices of product, or know what supplements you're going to need to add to the profile as you add compost to the soil. And what we report here with the USCC is physical, chemical, and biological characteristics of compost. A couple of links there to be able to look up more information. Next slide. So what you get back as a customer, actually the facilities get something called a compost data technical sheet, the CTDS. That's the report that they're going to get back. And that's what a commercial composter should share with you. There are guidelines for testing intervals. The labs are standardized. The testing process is standardized so that regardless of which STA participant you're going to get an equivalent test and report. Like I said, we're checking for a lot of different parameters here, but there are certain US EPA guidelines for heavy metals and pathogens, and those are things that are going to get a pass-fail here. We also provide information about the feedstocks. So Jess mentioned that. You may choose to use certain products or avoid certain products. If certain applications, certain types of materials may not be appropriate for certain applications. Next, please. So this is what the USCC STA report looks like. It's a 2-pager with the testing results on the left, directions for product use. So it might say that this is better for, an erosion control project, or this might be ideal for a garden application. And also some information about the compost ingredients. Next slide, please. And here's a zoom in on that left side. And just to point out that there's a parameter for maturity and another parameter or test parameter for selected pathogens and trace metals. These are all things that you're going to want to know about. The maturity, stability, those are going to be test parameters. They're going to basically tell you if this is ready to be shared or used, excuse me. Yeah. Is the composting process completed, tested against growing actual plants in this compost medium. So you're going to want to know that, there are reports out there of folks who use compost from even reputable manufacturers, and they end up with a bad result. What was the reason for that? If you have a compost, you can go back and see, was it something in the test, or you can avoid putting that product down in the first place. And this is an important point. If you're purchasing compost and whomever it is that you're dealing with won't provide test data, it's unlikely that it's going to be a quality product. Though people like Jess, Midwest Organics Recycling, the other composters who are engaged in the STA program, they're proud of their product because they know that they've put it through the right testing and are doing it the right way. Next slide, please. So where can you find compost that's of high quality? Shared a few links here. The USCC STA program actually does have a map, so you can punch in your state and it'll provide information about participants. So there are 2 links there. One is just to get more information about the program itself, actually, and then you can find information about the specific sites. And then IFSCC has a resource on our page where to find finished compost. It's a map we have. Our IFSCC member facilities are tagged in red, and other state information is provided in, I believe, green. So these are going to be locations where you can punch in your location, see what's around you, and see if that's a good fit. There are others who are resellers of these good products made by our IFSCC members, and you may look to those other resources, and we can always connect you. IFSCC is happy to engage. So if you have questions, just send a note my way, and we'll start to work with you to figure it out. Next slide. One of the things that I think I want to bring to this audience's attention is we're talking about composting, and composting can mean the diversion process itself. If you use a commercial hauler to take your food organics, or if you're just taking landscape material off your property, that ends up at a facility like Jess's, and there's no magic mom who goes to that facility and plucks the contaminants out, whether it's a tennis ball, a Coke can, or a product that is not organic and doesn't break down. That's our responsibility, each one of us who engages in this. And it's important not just because you're trying to protect the commercial composter and keep them going, but if you're the user and you're trying to find a compost that's a good quality product, you don't want those contaminants in there. Glass is particularly problematic. So if you imagine, working with that compost in your garden, if it's that scale, you don't want to run your hands through glass, and that's a hard product to screen. So we all are the first line of contamination control. Next slide, please. Compostable plastics, compostable products are a complicated topic, more complicated than I can go through in this moment here in this amount of time that's allocated. But commercial facilities can break down compostable products. There are different technologies. Some perform well, some perform poorly. And the only way to know that these products are actually tested and meet even the basics of standards are to get one of these two certifications. These are US certifications. By the BPI uses lab data, the ASTM standards, and the CMA certification has a level that's a little bit higher in terms of what testing. So they do field testing. They actually run those products through the specific technologies. So if it's windrow, they'll give it a CMA windrow certification. If it's an aerated static pile, they give it a CMA ASP certification. But these are going to be things that you're going to want to look for. If you see a product on the shelf that says compostable and it doesn't have one of these, it's not to be trusted, quite frankly. And this is really important especially for those facilities that will take these products, and not all do. You can't, at a commercial scale, identify which is the compostable cup and which is the lookalike, or the almost, I'm not going to say fraudulent, but the product that's labeled as compostable but doesn't carry a certification. So in order to minimize the risk, just if you're going to use that product, best bet, know where your compost is going. We're going to know where your organics are going. Check in with that facility, see if they accept BPI, see if they accept CMA, see if they accept both, and then find products that meet those certifications before you add them to the feedstock stream. Next slide, please. So looking at Northern Illinois as the model, and this is going to be similar for the rest of the state. We're going to be able to highlight a little bit here that is up north. Really, if you're going to talk about a commercial composting algorithm, there are 5 kind of approaches. The backyard obviously is its own, and Gwen has already gone through that. But there's something called the ride-along program, and that would be a situation where you have landscape waste collection as mandated by the state of Illinois. And in this case, you can add organics to you can add food scraps, to those organics in the same cart. When the commercial hauler comes and grabs that cart, they're going to take your food scraps too. Typically that's a seasonal ride-along. They call it ride-along because it's in the same bucket, same and that's typically a seasonal approach. You have a commercial year-round third bin. So you have a designated receptacle, whether that's a cart scale, whether that's a bucket scale, but it's a municipal program where you would have a year-round compost as a third bin. Bucket exchange, again, this could be, it says here, supplements a seasonal program, absolutely, but it can be your 12-month solution, depending upon what your garbage collection program looks like, your recycling program looks like. You may hire an independent hauler, of which several are IFSCC members, to specifically grab your food organics. You collect it in the bucket, they swap out the bucket, off you go. There are drop-off programs. So Chicago has been excited to roll out a number of drop-off points, and that's important. And then other drop-off events, there may be one-off events. The one thing I also want to add to the list is the community garden, right? So don't forget, even if you're not a backyard composter, there's that other scale, which is if there's a community garden, composting at that location can meet the need and should be supported. Gualco data. So this is your neighbor to the cross border, their neighbor. Just some statistics showing that 95% of Lake County communities are members of SWALCO, and 80% of those communities have access to composting. So it's an organization that's a solid waste agency that's really leading the campaign here to provide resources and opportunities. Next slide, please. Which gets us back to IFSCC. We were born as the Illinois Food Scrap Coalition, added the name and composting, added to the name and added and composting to reinforce that we're not just a food scrap composting. This is an all organics platform, an all organics agenda. And as such, we have membership that runs the full spectrum, from folks who want to divert the food organics, keep that material out of the landfill, folks who backyard compost, the haulers are part of the team, the large scale processors are part of the team, and then the compost users, because if we don't create the circularity, we're not going to support the infrastructure. So there is a place at the seat at the table and a place in the organization for everybody who might be at all interested in any step of the process. So our website's there. We are in the midst of our membership drive. So if you're interested in joining the organization, please check us out. And then very importantly, International Compost Awareness Week is something that the Compost Research and Education Foundation, which is the 501c3 spinoff from the U.S. Composting Council, runs every year. It's the first full week of May. Illinois has been a leader in preparing programming, and there is a wealth of programming. So if you want to learn about how to compost, where to compost, about compost use, there's so much information and so many opportunities, and you can check our website and see what's coming. Next slide. These are our sustaining members from 2024. We will hope to see all of those on the slide in the next few months, that when this is replaced after our membership drive. And then we'd love to see yours added. So please consider checking us out on the website and joining if you're interested. Next slide. Okay, I think I'll pass the baton.
Thanks, Benjamin. Hi, everyone. This is Amy Bartucci. I'm going to be helping with the chat and any questions that may or may not have been answered during this. Thank you to Merlan for helping out with that. Thank you to all of our speakers. I'm hoping people can capture that QR code, and we'll probably just stop screen sharing and I'll be able to take a look at all of your wonderful faces. We've had over 43. It looked at one point we had 44 folks here this evening, and it's just been a great start to Soil Health Week. I was having not the best time trying to keep up with which questions were and were not answered, but I'm happy to pitch a couple of things and see if they did get bubbled up. Maybe Merlan can help me. Was the question about the PFAS and PFOS answered in the chat yet, Merlan? I saw something about, is there
Not
any way
yet.
to avoid? Yeah,
That was a newer one, and I have not answered that yet. But if
yeah.
somebody else there, maybe Jess or one of the other folks.
I think it's a hot topic for sure. So we can make sure we, you know, spend a bit of time if we want. Benjamin, did you want to give a USCC overarching kind of summary about PFAS and PFOS?
Yeah, happy to do that. It's a complicated issue. It's a ubiquitous material, which is the problem, and you can't ban it, right? So the question is there something about compost that imposes a higher risk than non-compost if you're gonna add a nutrient in a chemical fertilizer context, or manage soil, your property with topsoil versus compost. And the answer is it is extraordinarily unlikely. The STA program, both BPI and CMA do check for, essentially check the big P and see what quantity. They do have thresholds so that when the material is, whatever product is being manufactured and tested under their regimen for certification, they do set thresholds, but PFAS per se is not necessarily tested for, or is not tested for. At this point, testing for PFAS is extraordinarily expensive, and it just isn't something that the STA program can incorporate. That said, this testing regimen, the TMECC that's used is the test standard for the STA program, is being updated. So as different technologies come online to be able to test for PFAS, we'll be able to get potentially get another test into that regimen, but we're not there yet.
Thanks, Benjamin. I did put a link in from USCC, and I believe there might be also an action alert that we could share in regards to that. But Benjamin had mentioned about you can't ban it. I also think that is, you can't ban what's already existing, but also talking about the manufacturing side of things, there will be some consumer product things that we'll want to keep watch out for so that we remove them from the environment so that we're not having as many PFAS and PFAS to deal with. So we just want to keep that clear. Obviously, the compost downstream is not to be blamed. We got to talk about the upstream issues. I saw another question earlier. It was about the dehydrators. Did that get answered in the chat while we were rolling through? Because I think there's a really good link that we could talk about, and also it's a blog post, and this was also very highly tended to by the U.S. Composting Council. So Merlan, did we talk about the?
I just touched on it, and I mentioned that the ones I have most experience with in the home is vermicomposting and bokashi method, which is a fermentation process from the Japanese. And I have no real experience. I know a little bit about those, but there is a difference between composting and dehydration as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Benjamin spent some time talking about the definition of compost, and there's been a big hullabaloo about talking about what those kitchen dehydrators do and don't do. And they clearly don't make compost. They dehydrate your food. But when Gwen was showing the wasted food scale, it's really important to also keep in mind the idea and the priority to reduce wasting food going to the landfill. So these dehydrators do serve a purpose. However, they are definitely not the same effort as composters and processors believe for IFSCC and USCC have been putting a lot of time and effort into describing what these are and are not. So we call them food scrap dehydrators. And I believe the one that was mentioned about mill, that was part of the question, is one that USCC seems to be a little bit more lukewarm about and not necessarily discouraging folks to be a part of, because I believe that there's that circularity there with the dehydrated product to be able to go to, from what I remember, it was animals on the farms. Yeah. Does anyone have anything else about those?
I was going to pitch in a couple of points. Number one is to support what Gwen shared, and you saw that there was a temperature scale. A dehydrator might dehydrate, but it's never going to take the material through that thermophilic phase, have it there for long enough. It's a 24-hour process to dehydrate. That's not composting. You're going to dry it. You're not going to sterilize it. And the biology that we're talking about doesn't exist within a dehydrator. So it's certainly not anywhere close to composting. The other is that if it were to be ground up, and a lot of these products dehydrate, then they grind. And Gwen also shared that oxygenation is important, and Jess showed how in a commercial scale you use the turner. That's a tiny particle size. So actually the biology benefits by having larger particle size. So if you're going to find an application for it at your home, that may be fine. I'm not going to judge that. But if you're going to talk about dehydrating it so that you send less volume, less weight to the commercial facility, or throw less weight into your backyard bin, it's actually counterproductive. And yeah.
Good questions coming from everyone this evening. I saw another question and I was hoping to just put it out there again because I do get this question a lot, but I have no expertise in it. It was about the chicken coop bedding and wood shavings. Did that get answered? Is there anybody here on the call that has some experience with that? I tend to send those questions to other folks that are dealing with that from the farming and agriculture community, but I definitely think the Food Scrap and Composting Coalition has a lot of room for education to be able to understand where to direct folks to when they have those questions. Benjamin, have you gotten that question before about soiled chicken coop bedding and how it interacts with wood shavings and whether or not that decreases the nitrogen? Oh, I think you're on mute. I lost you.
I don't have an answer to that question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. Or Gwen or Jess or Gretchen herself. Is there anyone here who would be wanting to come off mute and ask their question live with anybody that was presenting this evening? If we haven't gotten to it in the chat.
I see a question here about testing your backyard compost. If just want to say these labs that do the compost testing, they're not exclusive to composting. They're typically soil testing labs. So if you were to choose to send them a sample, they would test it for you, and you'd be able to learn about how well or how ideally you would performing the process. The STA website probably has a link. I haven't looked in a little while here, but they likely have links to the soil testing labs. If you don't find that, then let me know, because I have access to some folks who can answer that question, and I can get you an address and a lab.
Paper pellets. I have a rabbit and would like to be able to compost that material as well. It sounds very similar to the earlier question.
Yeah, the one question about paper, just not all paper is equivalent. So the fact that the preference is to recycle when possible, that's great. You know, it's an interesting question, because what you hear from the field testers is that some paper products, some even compostable, labeled compostable ASTM, they meet the standard of ASTM compostable products, have ingredients in them, and they end up looking like little hockey pucks at the end of the composting process. That binder, when exposed to the temperatures of composting, ends up not breaking down clearly as well. May need to go through a bunch of rounds of composting, or may not do well in that pile. So it depends what's in there. Even paper towels, I've heard stories about those being complicated. So I guess if you're going to do it in the backyard, look and see how it performs, I guess is the question or the answer.
I think also too, like how pristine you want things. Paper could have coatings, paper could have print. Luckily, most ink today is soy-based, like on our newspapers and other things. Paper towels, some are bleached, some are unbleached. So I know some people who are really organic who are very, very particular about the types of paper products they do put into their backyard compost piles.
I agree. I never introduced myself, but I'm a backyard composter and was running the slides behind the scenes for these wonderful presenters. I'm also a board member for the Illinois Stewardship Alliance. So my name's Amy Bartucci, and I wanted to make sure everyone felt very comfortable being here, A, to meet the Land Conservancy of McHenry County, B, Midwest Organics Recycling. Thank you so much for all of your efforts over the years to be a sustaining member. Gwen is the author of the majority of the slides this evening, and I think as a young professional crushed it with the first use of those slides here in this Zoom meeting. And Benjamin, of course, thank you so much for all of your help too. We had a board member on. I know we have another board member or two, as well as Merlan here, supporting all the work of IFSCC. So what a great evening. I just wanted to make sure people do know that there are more events for Illinois Stewardship Alliance's Soil Health Week. If you came to us, you'll know, you probably got it through some of the newsletters that I know Gretchen and others have been putting out, but I can put a link to the Illinois Stewardship Alliance's website in the chat, so you can take a look if there's any additional virtual events. The IFSCC happens to have one tomorrow in person in the Kenilworth area. So if anyone would like to see something live or has neighbors or friends to be able to be in a setting with a panel, we'll have a few of our sustaining members, and our actual panelist, Tracy Kamek, is on tonight, who will be busy. So this is very exciting to see our March feeling this full. So I'm putting that in the chat if there's anything else.
Carmen has her hand up. Carmen has her hand up.
Oh yeah, is that Cecilia? Carmen, go ahead.
Hi, how are you? And good to see you again. But I don't know if I missed it or it was something that was quoted, but I didn't get the temperature. If it doesn't, because there are a lot of composters that are doing pretty good, but they don't use animal origin products in there. Does the composting time and the usage of that, is it the same or is it different?
Carmen, I recognize your voice. I know exactly who you are. I'm so glad that Benjamin did not allow us to miss your question. I still think we might not have the appropriate person to answer your question in regards to this when it comes to the animal substances that are getting mixed in. I think it would be its own webinar, I think, with the U.S. Composting Council and or IFSCC to learn more folks in Illinois that would be able to address that, because I definitely don't consider myself having known that over the years, focusing so much on food scraps and brown matter from the yard. We have a lot of our IFSCC composters are dealing with a lot of the yard waste. Does anyone on the call feel confident or have any suggestions for Carmen's question? And Carmen, I promise we could take the chat question and also deal with this outside of the Zoom and see if we can get somebody to help answer your question.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Okay. I think we're getting close to our hour. Again, thank you to the speakers. Thank you to all of those that attended this evening on a Monday evening to kick off Soil Health Week. We will send the YouTube recording as well as the slides to folks that attended and also registered. So we'll also include some resources from some of our sustaining members that will help further some of the information that you'll see in the slides that we use as resources throughout the IFSCC. So take a look at your inbox. I don't think it'll happen tonight, but you'll be getting it sometime in the next few days. Thanks, everyone. Good night.